In the second part of Chapter 7, we will talk about more rules of exponents. First, let's review the product rule of exponents. If you multiply two terms with the same base, you add their powers. The power rule of exponents, when you have a same base but a power raised to another power, you multiply the exponents. And the product of power rule of exponents says, if you have multiple terms inside of a parentheses raised to a power, then each individual term gets raised to that power. So in other words, the powers, they distribute or multiply. Let's apply those rules to do some more complicated problems. First example, what I would recommend is creating three different parentheses, one for the numbers, one for the x's, and one for the y's. We have three different terms. We got the numbers, we have the x's, and we have the y's. So create one parentheses for the numbers, one for the x's, and then one for the y's. So in one parentheses, we're going to put -3 times -5 times 2. In the second parentheses, I'm going to put x to the 4th times x to the 4th times x to the 6th. In the third, I'm going to put y to the 3rd times y to the 5th. Okay, now if I multiply this is 15 times 2 is 30. Now, when I multiply the same base, I'm going to add the power. So I'm going to be adding 4 plus 4 plus 6. Same over here, when I multiply the same base, I'm going to be adding the powers. So I'm going to add 3. And if there's no exponent, there's an exponent of 1. So I have 3 plus 1 plus 5. This is going to give me 30. 8 plus 6 is 14. 30x to the 14th. This is 4 plus 5 is 9. And then y to the 9th. Next example, let's do it in a similar way. So we have a parentheses, and in a parentheses, the first one I'm going to put the number. So I have 6 times -2 times 4. In my second parentheses, I'm going to put x. If there's no exponent, remember it's to the first. X to the first times x to the third times x to the second. In my last parentheses, I'm going to put a y to the first times y to the 7th times y to the 2nd. If I multiply this, that's -12 times 4 is -48. Now with the x's, I'm going to add 1 plus 3 is 4, plus 2 is 6, 1 plus 7 is 8, plus 2 is 10. So separate them into different parentheses and then simply add their powers if they're exponents or multiply them if they're numbers. Okay, next example, the negative exponents rule says that, well, first off, our final answer cannot have negative exponents. Our final answer cannot have negative exponents. Okay, so what do? Anytime you have something like x to the -a, this is equal to 1 over x to the a. So in other words, any negative exponents, you move them to the other side and the exponent becomes positive. Same thing happens if the exponent's on the denominator. You move it to the other side and the exponent becomes positive. For example, if we have 5 to the -3rd, notice we have a negative exponent. So we move it to the denominator to make the exponent positive. Now 5 cubed is 5 times 5 times 5. That's going to be 1 over 125. Same thing with 10 to the -2nd. Because it's a negative exponent, you move it to the other side, which means it goes to the denominator, and it becomes 1 over 10 squared, which is going to be 1 over 100. Now, on the other hand, if you have 1 over 4 to the -3rd, notice that 4 to the -3rd is on the denominator, which means it's going to go to the numerator and become positive. So this becomes 4 to the 3rd, which is 4 times 4 times 4, or 64. Same thing with 1 over 2 to the -5th. Because it's on the denominator, it goes to the numerator and becomes positive. 2 to the 5th is going to be 32. The next example, we have x to the -3rd raised to the 4th power. When you have a power to a power, you multiply the exponents. This gives you x to the -12th. Once again, we can't Our final answer cannot have a negative exponent, so we move it to the denominator to make the exponent positive, and this becomes 1 over x to the 12th. Over here, we have 5 times negative 3. This becomes x to the negative 15th. Multiply the exponents, and this becomes 1 over x to the 15th. Okay, so let's take another example. We have x to the negative 3rd times x to the 5th times x to the negative 4th. First thing you have to do is, anytime you multiply the same base, you add the power. So we have negative 3 plus 5 plus negative 4. So we apply the product rule for exponents, which means when you multiply the same base, you add the powers. So if I add negative 3 plus 5, that's 2, and 2 plus negative 4 is negative 2, so this gives us x to the negative 2nd. And according to the negative exponents rule, if you have any x to the negative exponent, it goes to the other side and becomes positive. So it goes to the denominator and becomes 1 over x squared. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. We have y. Because we're multiplying 3 different y's, it's going to be negative 9 plus 4 plus 3. This is going to be negative 9 plus 4 is negative 5, and negative 5 plus 3 is negative 2. And this is going to be 1 over y squared. Next, we have 8 squared times x to the negative 3rd squared. This gives you 64x to the negative 6th. Now, here's the thing. The 64, it does not have a negative exponent. The negative 6, the exponent of negative 6 only belongs to the x, not to the 64. So it's like saying the 64 has an exponent of positive 1. Because if there's no exponent, it's always a 1. So the 64, it doesn't move because it doesn't have a negative exponent. Only the x does. So this is going to be 64. Now the x to the negative 6 goes to the denominator and becomes positive. So this will become 64 over x to the 6th. Same thing over here. We have 2 to the 3rd times x cubed to the 3rd times y to the negative 4th to the 3rd. So 2 to the 3rd is 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. We have a power to a power, so 3 times 3 is going to be x to the 9th. And then here you have power to a power. This becomes y to the negative 12th. Now the only term with the negative exponent is the y to the negative 12th. Not the 8, not the x to the 9th. Those are positive exponents. This is like 8 to the 1st, and this is x to the 9th. So when you move the y to the negative 12th to the denominator, this becomes 8x to the 9th divided by y to the 12th. So only move the term that has a negative exponent and no other terms. And that's it.